The countdown to Election Day is on, and the party leaders are crisscrossing Canada, shoring up support for their parties and their local candidates. Over the course of the federal campaign, we'll be discussing municipal issues from coast to coast to coast. From housing to infrastructure, from bail reform to resource development, and from agriculture to social services. Municipalities across Canada are tackling a wide range of challenges, but they can't do it alone. They need a strong and reliable partner at the federal level to help build stronger, more resilient communities. Now, over the course of this election, we'll be speaking with representatives from each of the major parties to learn more about their party's commitments and their vision for Canada after April 28th. And today, we're starting that journey talking about the new Democratic Party of Canada. To help us do that, we are pleased to welcome back to the show Edmonton West NDP candidate Sean McQuillan. So without further ado, let's dive into Canada Votes 2025, the new Democratic Party.
Hi, my name is Sean McQuillan, and I'm the NDP candidate for Edmonton West, and I'm here to show you that better is possible. I was born and raised in Edmonton. I'm a union member, small business owner, husband, and proud father of 3. And I've spent the past decade working to create childcare options for those who work shift work, making it so that union members and small businesses can thrive. I believe in fiscal responsibility and universal programs with fewer administrative costs. And I also believe in the politics of cooperation, where we work together towards the common good instead of acting like children on Parliament Hill. I have a proven track record of effectively moving the needle forward in uncertain times, presenting innovative and creative solutions, and working across the floor to make sure that families are the ones that get out ahead. And I'm going to do that here for our community of Edmonton West.
Sean, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about your campaign to become the NDP MP for Edmonton West and also the new Democratic Party as whole. And I want to start local, and then we're going to go into a more broader approach of what the NDP is all about. So first off, introduce yourself to the listeners, to the viewers who are going to be tuning in and watching you. Who is Sean, and why is he running for the NDP in Edmonton West?
Well, my name is Sean McQuillan. I was born and raised in Edmonton, although I did live in Vancouver for almost 15 years working in film and television. While I was there, I got very involved with the labor movement because IATSE, which is a union for films, essentially is a member of the BC Federation of Labor, and I ended up on the BC Federation of Labor Executive Council as their Indigenous Workers Caucus chair. Co-chair. Basically, I got really involved with work for pushing things forward for labor families and then Indigenous rights. And it's just kind of snowballed from there. When my child was born in 2019 in Vancouver, I happened to run into Jagmeet Singh after a meeting with the Minister of Childcare, which my wife and I have a nonprofit where we're building non-standard hour childcare for shift workers. And she said, "Oh, I got a meeting before," and he had switched Jagmeet. And I talked to him afterwards. And he said, "Tell me about yourself." He said, "Do you ever thought of running?" And I said, "No, of course not. That's like the last thing I'd want to do." And he pestered me in a very positive way, and until I ran. And so I ran in 2019, 2021 in Vancouver. I brought the NDP from third place to second in what was a previously held conservative riding. They had spent $90,000 on their campaign, and I spent 9, and I got 1,000 more votes. So very, very good vote efficiency on the dollars. I'll say that. And I moved back home. This is where I was raised, mostly to put my kids back into school here. There's wonderful French programs, and my wife's French, so it was very important to us that our children speak French, and it wasn't really available in British Columbia. And so I'm happy I'm home. I've been reconnecting with friends and family, and it has been fantastic. When I left Edmonton, I'd felt it was very limiting, and I've seen it grow in such a positive way and in a progressive way, something I didn't feel growing up. And I felt I could only have that by moving to another province. And now that I've moved and done work and come back, I see we have those kind of people in Edmonton, and it's positive, it's growing. And I think that's the trajectory of Edmonton in particular. Alberta's working on it. And I think it's just something where I think we can have progressive voices that advance the lives of workers. And that's really what I'm all about.
Why is the NDP the progressive voice in this election?
Well, we got a red Tory running. Mark Carney seems like the adult in the room, and I can absolutely say, compared to Pierre Poilievre, that is probably accurate. But it's two different types of conservatives running. That's what it is, and I think it's unfair that people have already pushed the NDP out to relevancy when we haven't even started. We got 30 days in this campaign. We got lots to prove and lots to show. And particularly in Alberta, the NDP are the voice that opposes the Conservatives. The Liberals are almost a non-pulsated issue here. Like, and my Liberal opponent here, he's a former Conservative. So I'm literally running against two Conservatives. I am the only progressive voice at Edmonton West. And I think it's something that we need to start really exemplifying that and showing that on a national level.
So what are you hearing at the door? Because we are, as of this recording, a week into this campaign. While we do have 30 days left, you have been out door knocking. I've seen some posts that you have been out and door knocking across your riding.
So,
What are you hearing? What are you hearing from people? I know it's like you said, it's in the middle of a snowstorm, but what are you hearing from the people of Edmonton West right now about what their concerns and wants are from the next federal government as of April 29th, the day after the next election?
well, three things. Right now, the political discourse is completely consumed by Donald Trump. That's a fact. However, the problems that existed before Donald Trump didn't magically go away the minute he became the biggest thing to talk about. And so the things that were still a problem before are a problem now. Everyone's focusing on the forest fire, thousands of miles away, instead of there's a fire in their own kitchen that they're ignoring. And so we're having this issue right now that even, the party leaders, particularly the liberals and conservatives, are ignoring now. They're like, oh, this is how I'm going to deal with Trump. This is how I'm going to deal with this. We're going to talk about our two largest industries. We're talking about auto and a few things. But really, they're ignoring the same issues. And, having come from Vancouver, I saw what happens when housing becomes untenable. And it is something that it was very visceral for me there, and it was a lived experience. Now, in Edmonton, we're not there yet, but I can see the economic markers. I can see where it's happening. And because we have, suppressed wages, particularly because we have a UCP government in the provincial level, we see what's happening and we're on track for that. And Albertans right now are still succeeding, but not because of having conservative governments, despite them. It's because of our work ethic and who we are at our core. And so when I've been knocking at the door, thankfully, because of the popularity of the Alberta NDP and Naheed Nenshi, it's crossing over. It's crossing over. They're like, I really like what the provincial are doing. What about you in the federal? They're saying, I'm not sure what you're about. Tell them who I am. I tell them what I'm about. And it aligns. It aligns with what they really, truly want, which has been positive. I've had, it's door knocking. You're going to get a few doors in your face. But for the most part, it has been extremely positive.
Okay. So you talk about the tariffs and understandable that there's some challenges that Donald Trump has forced himself into this election, and that is a challenge upon itself. But I want to talk about some local issues first before we get into the Trump of the matter, if you don't mind me saying
Yeah.
that. Um, Alberta is quite an oil and gas province. It is a province that is reliably blue, as we've seen in past elections. How does the NDP support the oil and gas industry in 2025? Because there is that attitude that the NDP may be a little bit more anti-oil and gas. So what do you say to those who are in your face or you're knocking on the door and say, what's your stance on the oil and gas industry in Alberta? Because it is the lifeblood of many workers and many people in Edmonton.
Well, I think I stated earlier that a lot of Alberta is succeeding despite the Conservatives, and that I actually heard a speech by Naheed Nenshi the other day, and then he was talking to some oil executives, and basically the conversation went like this. Daniel Smith went into the room and said, "Can you believe that these crazy lunatics want net zero?" Whereas their own party and the entire industry has promised net zero. So there are two different complete things going on here where the industry itself is reading the writing on the wall and they are transitioning. And it's something where it's not people are in love with oil and gas. I've said this probably 100 times. I'm from here. People aren't in love with oil and gas. They're in love with providing for their families. That's what oil and gas has given Alberta. And they're afraid of that going away, and rightfully so. And so there are alternative energy sources. I know British Columbia has done great in starting to invest in hydrogen because we've had a lot of issues with electric, not only from oligarchs down south, but in general in the north. It's difficult maintaining electric vehicles and how they operate. But hydrogen has been proven to be able to do something in the north, not freeze up in the same manner, and be a viable alternative energy. So I think there's something where we're going to need oil and gas for a while. We have a Trans Mountain pipeline. The capital investment of creating an eastern pipeline, despite our current trade issues to the south, we don't really have a market that's going to exist in Europe. France and other countries, they're going to be outlawing essentially oil and gas within the next 10 years. A lot of them are switching entirely to electric or entirely to alternatives. So who's the market? What are we going to spend, 9 to $12 billion on an eastern pipeline if there's no one to sell it to? We have our new Western pipeline, we maintain it, and we work on creating new sources and transitioning. That's what we have to do. And it's the reality of right now with everything with our neighbors to the south. We can't ignore climate change and we can't ignore the need of the industry. So it's going to have to require capital investment from the federal government. And that means we have to have governments that work together on a provincial and federal level.
How do you think the NDP plays into that scenario, though? Because I would imagine that there are people looking and probably listening to this and watching this saying, "That's great, but how does the NDP fit into that equation of solving this issue of getting those pipelines built?" Because there might be some who would be a little pessimistic about what you're saying and say, well, Quebec is a big major factor and Ontario is a major factor, and getting these pipelines built isn't going to happen unless we bring everyone together. How does the NDP bring everyone together to get those things done?
I honestly don't think that Eastern pipelines are going to be a thing. I don't, regardless. I don't think that the NDP are going to be playing a role in that. I think what they will be playing a role is ensuring that any kind of transition involves workers and that involves high wages. I think it's not that it's a complete non-starter. Who knows who's going to form full government? Maybe if it was a complete super conservative majority, they might do that. But I think it's a bad investment. I'm a data guy. I like looking at numbers. The return of investment of spending what we would on an Eastern pipeline just doesn't make sense. It really, really doesn't. There are better ways to use the resources we have and to sell the resources we have and to self-manufacture the resources we have. It's not just about giving tax cuts to these companies so they come in and do this. It's about where do we have the crown corporations, where we keep the money in our country so that we can use that money to transition to alternative energy sources like hydrogen, etc. So it's I think the idea of we have to build out east. I don't think it really is going to work because if you look at the numbers, it's not going to bring in the money that we need it to. The price of oil is not going to stay where it is. The provincial government in Alberta has already found out, basing our entire budget off $70 a barrel, that it just doesn't, it's not going to work that way. You have to have other sources of revenue. You have to make sure you're diversifying your economy. And I think the idea of all or bust on this is going to be bust. And we need to avoid that entirely.
So where do you see it going then? Because it seems like you said we have Northern Gateway, we have Keystone XL, which Donald Trump wants to have conversations about again and possibly start that back up. And I'm just going to clarify here, are you saying that the NDP are against Energy East, or are you saying that you're against Energy East?
I think Energy East personally is a bad investment, and that is money. That's money wise. I'm not saying this based off anything else. It's just I've looked at the data and it doesn't think it's not a good investment. We can make money elsewhere, and we have more than enough ability to export the energy we currently are producing. And if we are serious about things like climate change, why are we trying to increase our output in an extreme manner instead of trying to create alternative energy sources that keep jobs, that keep high wage jobs in the country? If we're talking about protectionism, if we're talking about Canada first or anything like that, then we need to make sure that we do have that. And if we're relying our entire economy on an export-based industry and an export-based industry to buyers that are disappearing because the whole world is shifting, we have high output currently. Increasing that output to an extreme amount isn't going to make the country wealthy long term. The return of investment isn't going to work. We need to pivot while we can. We use the money that we're making now because we're making good money off it. But that money and that price of oil is not going to stay the way it is forever. And we need to be very conscious of that.
As I'm the municipal show and I speak to a lot of municipal leaders from across Alberta and across Canada, I want to talk about some municipal issues, but they have federal implications. And the one that I hear often is housing, housing, affordable housing. Are you hearing the challenges of getting into the homeowners market in Edmonton West? And how do you approach that conversation when someone says housing has gotten too expensive and I cannot afford to buy a house, let alone rent an apartment to potentially save up to buy a house? What do you say to them? And how does the NDP see working with municipalities to address the housing challenges that people are facing?
Well, the first thing that the federal government does with municipalities is co-ops are federally mandated, but they're municipally ran. And if we work with the CMHC and ensure that we have capital investment into co-ops, into ownership situations, it's not something where people are, they have self-autonomy in their lives. Right? They're able to own a property at a reduced rate. They know that they're not going to be evicted at the drop of a hat, things like that. That gives people autonomy. That when you talk about public housing for me is not renting. It is for a lot of people, but public housing for me is shared ownership, because without ownership you don't have autonomy. And I know Albertans, we like to have our own destinies in our control. That's the type of people we are. And living in BC for a while there, that wasn't always the narrative. And everyone was going, "Oh, we just need to have more rentals." I'm like, but then you're under someone else's thumb. And that's the Albertan me coming out going, I want to make sure that people have the ability to own. And that does come from programs like co-op housing, and that does come from the federal government and helps, and it is municipally ran. And so to be able to partner with municipalities on creating that type of housing, I think that is one of the best ways to ensure that. But also that we don't change the definition of affordable housing. The CMHC and certain programs have changed the definition under the Liberals from what is the economic affordable housing, which is 25% of someone's income, to below market rate. Now, I've seen what happens in Vancouver firsthand. Market rates are manipulated. They're manipulated by many, many different sources, by corporate entities, by foreign ownership, by even just local mom and pop landlords getting a mortgage that they are completely over leveraged on and require the renter's income to afford. The renter can't afford it; they can't afford their mortgage, and they lose their investment. So it is a house of cards when you build up an economy like that. If people are over leveraged on housing, what happens is they are more reliant on government programs. They can't afford to save for their retirement. They can't afford to save for, any kind of life event. And so when the bottom falls out from under them, there's nowhere to go. So it is actually the responsibility of government. We announced a long time ago that housing was a human right, but affordable housing is what that needs to be. It's one thing just to house people, but it's another to make sure that not every dollar they have goes to it. And I think the NDP probably the only party right now that is particularly concerned about that. Mark Carney and he's got a big buzz right now, but his track record and what he is for as an investment banker and what his investments have sat is in corporate housing, is in places that encourage, profit over, a place to live. And so that's where I think the NDP truly sit way ahead of anyone else right now in this.
As the potential next Alberta MP, and I'm assuming you follow the news just like I do, that the province have set out rules that municipalities cannot work directly with the federal government on these issues anymore. They have to work with the province. How does the NDP react to having to deal with Danielle Smith, Rick McIver, Jason Nixon to address these issues? Because I can imagine the NDP and the UCP are probably not as friendly as the UCP and the Conservative Party are.
Well, the electorate's not as friendly to the UCP as they once were either. And I don't think the UCP are going to last. 100%. I am 100% confident that at this point, the UCP have put their own nails in their own coffins. And, if she chooses to run a snap election, if the Liberals win or things like that, she will probably eat a bit of humble pie. And as the Conservatives do like to eat their own, I fully suspect she might not even make it to an election at this point. So we'll see what happens. I think right now, those types of current barriers will not last. We have to work with what we have, obviously, and that's going to probably be dangling restrictions over federal money. And those restrictions of federal money, she's refused again and again. So I've worked in creating a non-standard hour childcare, and how the UCP is handling federal money for childcare. It's like refusing it because there's any stipulations, because what it does is it's preventing nonprofit childcare from superseding profit childcare. And, as we all know what happens with the UCP in all these situations, much like the current surgery healthcare scam, it's something where they're going, wait, these are our buddies' businesses. We got to protect those, instead of say, these are public services. These are things that need to be provided to people. And people are noticing. I've definitely, at the door, people often don't know the difference between federal and provincial politics, and that's fine. And because the biggest thing I hear more than anything is about healthcare. And so I think that's really resonating right now with people. Like, it is bad blood at the door. They're unhappy with what's going on with the UCP government. I was just at the Public Interest Alberta conference. They invited Danielle Smith, and instead of her going there, she went down to the States to talk to Ben Shapiro. So it's like you have a choice between talking to all of these unions and public interest people. We're giving you the chance. It's nonpartisan, and she denies it because she doesn't care about the general population. She cares about the small fraction of people that will vote for her. And so this is where I'm saying, we outnumber them. We do, but our base doesn't show up and theirs does. So I'm encouraging, and I need people to show up and vote. That's the only way you win.
One area that I can imagine you have heard a lot about over the last few days, over the last week, is the affordability crisis that people are struggling with today. Prices are going up. They go to the grocery store and prices are high. And I say that because I just went to the grocery store about a day before recording this interview, and I can tell you my dollar does not go as far as it once used to. While we are still in early days and I've been watching all the party leaders come out with their announcements, I haven't heard much about the affordability from the NDP. I've heard about tax cuts, about housing, about what Donald Trump, because he's injected himself into the first week, and I imagine that's what the leaders need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see in the NDP that will help, and I say average, and because I hate using that word, but help Edmontonians, help Canadians address the affordability crisis that they are dealing with? Because utilities are high, gas is high, food is high, and people are struggling. And we are seeing a record number of people going to the food banks today because they can't afford to live day to day. How does the NDP help Canadians address the affordability crisis?
Now, the NDP are uniquely positioned for this because they're the only ones who don't accept a lot of corporate donations. And so, what I have seen,
But they do
we just
accept union donations. Well, they can't accept union donations because
no, you actually,
that,
no, you just can't actually.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I would if I could, trust me. But I run a cheap campaign, so it doesn't take much. But I will say, they are positioned in a certain way that's what we've seen. We've just had the carbon tax reduced to zero. Well, we didn't see gas prices drop. We've seen all sorts of different performative gestures from liberal governments, or bad faith votes of the conservatives here, and nothing seems to go down. And it's because what we're not allowing is any kind of regulation. And I think housing also applies to that. It is not a right to be a landlord. It is a business. If you're entering a business, contract, that's why we have, tenancy, the residential tenancy agreements and things like that. We have agreements that go into place with this. And so when it comes to food, when it comes to gas, when it comes to these other things, we need to have these agreements that, for human needs need to not set a certain profit margin. Because right now, I don't know if you saw the release of what happened with Superstore, and they had all of their numbers come out and like, here's our profit margins on dairy, 3,000% on yogurt, 1,000% on cheese. Of course, they got caught fixing the price of bread, things like that. And it's those are the dollars and cents that add up. Those are the ones that we feel on a daily basis more than anything else. And I saw it in the extreme in Vancouver. I did, and it's a big part of why I'm home. I don't want Edmonton to become an untenable, unaffordable place like I experienced firsthand. And
Is it
that is
becoming
like,
that way?
when you've lived in the worst, you get rose-colored glasses. I see rose-colored where a lot of people don't as much right now, because for me, I was in the extreme. I was in the worst position possible in terms of affordability. And coming back home, things seem more affordable, but then I go to the grocery store and it's identical. That's the same across the board. It doesn't matter what your housing, of course, I think is the number one cost for all households and is the one we have to be the most vigilant about. But now other costs are creeping up. And it is where it comes to human needs. We have such a large profit margin. We have monopolies running the show, telecoms. It is crazy that we have not allowed for a national telecom when we've paid for the entire infrastructure. It's crazy that we haven't allowed for national farm, or like full pharmacare, where we're actually, block negotiating the rates of all of it. I know there was a parliamentary budget office report years ago that said it would save $8 billion. And it just kind of went, okay, we'll just do free insulin. It's all these half measures, these means tested measures. We'll give to the very, very poor, but the middle class are now poor. So all these tax breaks, like that grocery rebate that was proposed last year, it was a total joke. Because first off, that amount of money, $500, it's like a $500 tax break. $500 in the way the economy is means nothing to a person individually. It's like, oh, look, we're putting $900 in your pocket by canceling this. Well, that doesn't actually help you. And so policies where they sound nice, oh, we're going to give you $500 in your pocket. We're going to give you $1,000 in your pocket. Those sound nice when you're really, really struggling. Man, I could really use $500 right now. But what really changes is the larger policies where we say, all right, here's the limit on what you can profit on it. If you don't like it, we're going to make nonprofit versions of this because these are human needs. And no one's talking about that. And the only thing the NDP, and I do support them fully on this, is about really talking about monopolies and where we can change things in the capital corps so it isn't profit based. Because we've had too many issues where they've gone amok. There's been no competition. It sounds funny. I was actually in France a couple years back for the Cannes Film Festival, and I went to, it's in a small little country with the F1s there.
You're talking to the wrong sports guy here.
Yeah.
If you asked me what municipality it was, I'd be able to tell you.
Okay, Brooks. We're going to Brooks. Went to Brooks. No, okay. No, it was just funny. I went there, and the groceries were cheaper there than they were in Canada. Like, it was the most expensive country in the world, and it's that little one. I'm trying to remember. It's going to blank my name, but the groceries were cheaper, and that was the first thing I clocked, and I didn't understand why. And there's a lot of, and then coming back, seeing where the monopolies come into play, seeing how we produce and even import our food. Right now we're going to notice if these tariffs do go through next week, it is going to be massive. We're going to have tens of thousands of jobs lost. It's a fact, and we're going to notice prices increase. So how we create in Canada is very important, and how we limit where, it's great if we create in Canada, but if those remain monopolies, we're going to be in big trouble.
So just to clarify, just for those who are listening and watching
Sorry.
this episode is being recorded on March 29th. This episode will be airing on April 1st. So when Sean said next week, he means tomorrow, April 2nd. So just to clarify that for those who are going, what do you mean next week? Does he not know? No, I just want to make sure that people know that we're recording this a little bit before it does go to air. I have one last question before I turn to the broader scope of the NDP in the last 4 years. Every politician I've ever spoken to has that one passion that really drives why they get involved in politics. They have that duty to serve. And we talked about your duty to serve the very first time that you came on the show. But I want to ask a sort of a more poignant question. What will you champion in Ottawa if you get elected on April 28th in this election?
I've got a few things, but
what's the one?
What's the one?
I'm making you do Sophie's choice here, because I think the big one that you say, this is the one, if I can get this done in 4 years, I'll be a happy MP.
For me, it's always been housing. For me, it has always been ensuring that everyone has a pathway to ownership, no matter your income level, and that rent, if you are in a place that you are spending more than 25-30% of your rent, that is not acceptable to me. And unfortunately, I don't think that's that's not a 4 year solution. Most things I care about are long-term, unsexy things. They're the types of things that don't necessarily get politicians elected, but they're the things that change a country. They're the things that long-term can make a country, thrive. And, from generations from now, we can say we did that. And one of those things that, the NDP has done was universal healthcare. It's been generations now, and we're still proud of it. Now we've got things that we need to fix about it. But That's nothing that's part of our identity and who we are. And I want that to be with housing too. We're in a country here that there's no reason anyone should be spending all of their income on housing, and that we should be in the situation where we are, where people feel so strapped. We're too wealthy of a country. We're too large of a country. This should not be that thing. And, having experienced what I did in Vancouver and coming back home to Edmonton, I know I can change it for my community here. And I know that I can be a voice for everywhere. And that's what I want to do.
I want to turn to the NDP as a whole now, and I'm going to ask you some very political questions. But Sean, I think you are prepared for it because you are a political candidate, so you should be able to answer some of these questions that I may be playing devil's advocate with you.
That's all right.
Last 4 years, the NDP have had a supply and confidence agreement with the governing Liberals under Justin Trudeau. There will be some who say the Liberals and the NDP have gotten us to the place where we are when it comes to the cost of living, the cost of the affordability crisis. What do you say to those who may say that the NDP and the Liberals are so much alike that that's the reason why they joined that supply and confidence agreement and say, I can't vote NDP because you're just Liberal adjacent?
That's an easy one for me because I know a lot of the MPs personally. I'm very fortunate and blessed that way. And when I talk to them, everything we got at a concessions from the Liberal government, we got kicking and screaming. If you're not in the room, from a distance, it's easy to see, oh, the NDP are propping up the Liberals, but no, we are holding their feet to the fire. We are making them do things they would never do. The dental care program is not what we want, but it's our start. The pharmacare program is not what we want, but it's a start. And we have to open those doors to get what we want. And that took basically saying we're going to shut down your government if you don't do it. And so this isn't a situation where, we're just going along with whatever the Liberals want. Everything positive, for the most part, that the Liberals had done over the last 4 years was because the NDP pushed them further to make sure that there are supports for the workers there. Even things like it was great when we had an unanimous vote for anti-scab legislation inside Parliament. Things like that. Like we are making sure that we are the voice of reason. And this is crazy right now. And if I get a quick aside, if I can, when it comes to what we're doing right now in politics, we're playing a team sport. And we've lost the plot in what Canadian politics is because we're fixated on trying to get our team to win, that we're not sending the most capable local candidates to Ottawa. And we've ended up with a lot of benchers who aren't even bringing good ideas to the table, who are just seat fillers. They repeat slogans over and over again. This has been an entire, election of slogans for the past while. And I mean, we're paying people to sit there for 10 or 20 years. We're doing nothing, maybe putting a single bill for it. And it doesn't sound like that's a good investment of our money. Now, the NDP MPs I know, like Benita Zarrillo, for example, she is a 4-year MP and she has put forward 6 bills and has been the largest advocate for people with disabilities on Parliament that I've ever seen in my entire career. And it's amazing to see what a small group of MPs has been able to do. So, and if you start, I'm a nerd. I watch a lot of our Commons and CPAC, and I see what's going on. And I'll tell a little story after another question about when I was actually in Ottawa and what I saw. But right now, I think when we've lost the plot here, every party is bringing something important to the table. The Bloc, the NDP, everything. And right now, we're playing red pill or blue pill. And it's not getting the results we need because that's what we've been doing for the past 10, 20 years. We actually have gotten more done in a minority government than I think we ever did in the majority governments. And the majority governments are the ones that are, littered with scandals because there's no one keeping them accountable. If there's a scandal in a minority government, we go back to an election. Then, when we had SNC-Lavalin, when we had conservative scandals, things like that with majority governments, we couldn't do anything. They're a majority government. We have to wait until they call an election. So I think the NDP playing a very important role. And without us, if we're just going to vote for Team Blue or Team Red, we're going to get into the same mess we've been in again and again.
You know my audience quite well because only you would be able to find the one NDP MP who is a former city councillor and say that they've done a good job. That's just for Benita, who is was the MP because as of dissolution, no longer MP, but they're running a candidate. But they were the MP who in British Columbia, and I forget the name of the community, but I think it's Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it Port Moody Coquitlam? So thank you for the municipal shout out there, Sean,
I'd say there's one other former municipal councillor who's an NDP MP is very good, Matthew Green. Matthew Green's
yes,
been a fantastic voice as well, I'd say.
from Hamilton Center. So you talk about the wins, and that's great. But the NDP didn't get much credit for those wins. Is that a problem when you're going door knocking? Because when things go right, the Liberals can say that they did these things. They did dental care, they did pharmacare. But when they go wrong, the Liberals will go, well, the NDP didn't support us. So when you're door knocking, do people understand that the NDP did fight for these major victories, in your words, like pharmacare, like dental care? While they're not perfect, they're a good start. Do you get the credit that you deserve?
Edmontonians are smarter than that. That's a fact. I've actually had no issues with that at the door whatsoever. Edmontonians, thankfully we've got still a strong education system here and good teachers because yeah, no, they know. This isn't something people know what the game is. People know when people are being, in unhonest or inhonest or whatever. It's just I've seen people go, no, we know that's what the NDP have done. I've had people literally say, hey, here's my dental care card. I'm a senior. Thanks, guys. That's something I've seen. And so it is not something where the Liberals are rightfully taking any credit for it. And honestly, in Edmonton in particular, the Liberal candidates we have are mostly conservatives. So like people here who know, they know. And it's not something that you can just wave a hand over saying we're right. I've actually asked Liberal candidates okay, great. You say you support pharmacare. What about pharmacare do you support? And they go, and they don't have an answer for me. Whereas I can tell them the entire costed out parliamentary budget office report. You want people who are knowledgeable and understand this. And instead, it's just a lot of fancy words. And I experienced that when I was doing Indigenous lobbying. The Liberal government had announced $750 million for missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls over 5 years. They spent 25 million of it. The rest of the 600 million went back to general coffers. So they got $750,000 worth of goodwill, but never actually spent the money or helped anyone. And that is the kind of that's why I can't trust a Liberal because they'll say they're doing something nice and not do it. The Conservatives won't do it at all. So that's where we're coming into these issues.
Okay, so we mentioned him at the top of the interview, so let's dive into the man who is not on the ballot, but he seems to want to be on the ballot, making Canada the 51st American state, and that is Donald Trump. Now, earlier this last week, by Wednesday, Donald Trump injected himself into this Canadian election as only he could by announcing tariffs on the auto sector in Ontario and reciprocal tariffs as of April 2nd, starting, I think, April 3rd, from what he says. But again,
Who
what
knows?
happens on April 2nd, I don't know what's going to happen, but we're taking him at his word. Why is the NDP in the best position to stand up for Canadians when it comes to these tariffs? Because the media, and I say the mass media, even the ones who are just online, are solely focused on Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, and Jagmeet Singh doesn't seem to be getting the airtime that he deserves because he is a third one of the party leaders and he deserves to be heard. How does the NDP inject themselves into this fight when it seems to be dominated by what Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre is going to do?
Because with the NDP, we start with the workers. We don't start with the companies. We don't start with the response to the tariffs. We start with what's going to happen to the people and their jobs. And so people are going to be affected immediately. And the problem we are going to have right now is we're going to talk about anti-tariffs. We're going to talk about how we're going to, build sectors from scratch. But that does nothing for the people right now. It does nothing for the people who are going to lose their homes. So I worked in the film industry, and we had those American strikes in 2023. Everything shut down in Canada pretty much, except for some domestic production in Toronto. And what I personally experienced and what other people in my industry experienced was the government didn't know what to do with us. Government didn't know what to do with us, didn't want to help us. They said, oh, well, just transfer your business that rents medical equipment to movies to doing something else. And it's like, what else? Well, just sell it to actual hospitals. It's outdated equipment. It has no use to actual medical uses. It's something that is only specific for this industry. And so a lot of these times are like, well, just kind of do this, where people don't understand the industry. They don't understand what they're talking about. So when we talk to auto workers, we go, okay, what can you do that's different? What can we actually make that's different? And how can we financially bridge you? And yeah, that costs money. Financially bridge you to ensure that you don't lose your home. Because I know people who lost their homes. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. And it's just that's where I think the NDP can actually step in more than anyone else is because we care about the people on the ground.
Would you say the same thing about the oil workers as well? Because the 10% tariff
Absolutely.
on
No,
resources,
not even a
be,
question about it.
no, and I understand, but I just want to make sure I get this out correctly because there's been a lot of talk about the auto sector right now because that's the big sort of shiny object in the window. And I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I'm just saying that's the thing
No,
that we're talking
I
about right
agree with
now.
you.
But we do have the canola industry that is going to be is being hampered by Chinese tariffs on EV because of the Canadian retaliatory EV cars from China, and the canola
Which is
industry is
America's
going to
fault, but that's another thing.
yeah, which the canola industry is going to be decimated, according to people that I've spoken to, farmers across
Yeah.
Canada. We have the oil industry. We have small businesses in some of these border communities who are very reliant on cross-border trade, even in Edmonton, who are reliant on cross-border trade. What's the NDP message to the workers, to the business owners who are very concerned about what is going to happen as of April 3rd or are incredibly concerned right now because we have a man in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who one minute he wants tariffs, the second minute he's pausing tariffs, and the third minute, and this is just a whiplash effect that businesses cannot prepare for.
Basically, that they're probably the only party that will take immediate action for their bottom dollar. So what I've seen a lot is these reactions are slow. These reactions are entirely based off wait and see economics. Well, we'll see what happens. We will wait until we get the data back. But the data doesn't give them their homes. The data doesn't make sure there's food on the table. And you need to be willing to spend that money. And I don't think Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre would be willing to spend that money. They're both going to go, well, we have to be fiscally responsible about this. But investing in people is fiscally responsible. Those people are going to put the money right back into the economy. Those people are going to make sure that we don't lose businesses because right now that's what's going to happen. If all of a sudden everyone in those industries are going to not have money, the repercussions are not going to be just one thing. I'll continue using the film industry as an example because that was where it happened most recently in my life. We would see even like furniture stores shut down. So we buy thousands of pieces of furniture for movies and TV. Furniture stores shut down. IKEA almost said they might have to close. Like they were worried about their bottom line in McQuillan there. Things like that. We're noticing just from one industry that's shut down for about a year and a half and has never really fully recovered in the greater Vancouver area. It is something where they saw massive repercussions. And so I can only imagine what would happen with autos, with oil, with the canola. And I know neither of those governments are prepared to help people fast enough because I've already seen it happen. And I think the NDP are the only party that would.
I have taken about 45 minutes of your time, and I have one last question because I know you're a busy man and you're out campaigning as well. So, my last question for you, Sean, is this. Pitch yourself. Pitch yourself to the listeners, to the viewers. Pitch the NDP to the listeners and viewers who have not, about why they should vote for the NDP, why they should vote for you, and talk to them directly. Here's your 2 minutes. Go for it.
Well, I think that everyone needs to put their most capable voice forward. Everyone's going to be coming to the table with their own ideas and their own perspectives of what needs to be done. And I think we need to stop voting for people just because they wear the jersey of the leader that we like. I think people think that they've lost their voice for their in Ottawa, and it's because they have. It's because we have too many MPs just sitting there as seat warmers and not actually going and listening to the needs of the people around them. And, I got into this because I found that I really gained something by joining a union. I got all these benefits, and I went, why doesn't everyone have this? And when my children were born, I went, wow, I want a better future for them. Right now, they cannot afford even close to the life that I'm currently living, and I can't afford close to the life my parents were living for even less money. So if we don't have people who are truly concerned about the future and not just about, yes or no, red or blue politics, we're going to have the same results. And it has been proven again and again. And I know that I can be a solid voice for a community. I've done it before. And I know that I will listen to what the needs are. And I always just want to put people first. That's my thing. I really want to make sure that we are the ones getting ahead. And I don't really have any special interest groups supporting me, so it makes it a lot easier. And so I hope that, I do become a member of parliament because I think I have something to say. And I think I can help say both what I have to say and what you care about as an individual, because I'll listen. I've spoken on things that I've never even learned about until I realized how much it affected people because someone sat me down and told me about it. And I think that's the job of a member of parliament, to be able to communicate that, to be able to say that, and to be able to do something about it, like actually drafting bills. So
Sean, I
that's it.
want to John, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of your busy campaign to sit down with us and talk about yourself, talk about your campaign in Edmonton West, and also the NDP, the New Democratic Party of Canada, and talk about their vision for what Canada can look like after April 28th. So thank you so much for doing this. To the listeners, to the viewers, if you haven't already, be sure to. I just want to remind you that the links to Sean's websites, the NDP's websites, to Sean's Facebook pages will be in the show notes below. Check that out. If you're in Edmonton West, I'm assuming he has an email address that you can reach out to and ask him questions that we have not asked. So be sure to do that. And I'm assuming your local candidates are also happy to answer any questions that you have about the NDP and their platform. So, Sean, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs Canada Votes 2025. If you enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the world of the New Democratic Party of Canada, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform or here on YouTube if you're watching this today. If you haven't already, be sure to head over to our social media accounts and hit that subscribe button. We want to thank Sean for sitting down with us and taking time out of this busy campaign to talk about the New Democratic Party of Canada. If you want to learn more about the party and him, please check out the show notes below and you will find the links to the party's website and to his website where you can find all his social media accounts. If you haven't already, be sure to share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs Canada Votes 2025 tomorrow morning. Till then, everyone.